All right, here we go. Back on the Gill Athletics Connections podcast. I was doing some editing not too long ago, and I realized I say every time, "All right, here we go." That's kind of my intro to it, and so I'm excited. I'm excited for you guys and gals to be here. Thanks for pressing play. My name is Mike Cunningham. I am your host here at the Gill Connections podcast, and I just get I got the greatest job in the whole world. I get to bring you men and women from around the country, around the world at times, that are in this amazing profession of coaching track and field. And today is much like the others, a really amazing, fun one. I've known today's guest for a while. She's just one of the realest people in the world. I think that's how we kind of went beyond just business and actually became friends in this crazy world. So help me welcome the head coach of San Diego State, the Aztecs, right? Did I get that right? The Aztecs.
The Aztecs.
Love it. Help me welcome the wise, the wonderful Sheila Burrell. Sheila, how are you?
Good, Mike. Thank you for having me on the day after Christmas.
That's right. Yeah. Hello. Hope you got all your gifts opened and all that kind of good stuff, man. You live in San Diego, though. Isn't every day like Christmas? I mean, this is like heaven on earth here.
Most days are pretty cool, pretty nice, sunshine. Unfortunately, I don't know, I was in Sandy. I was on Monday, it was nice, and Tuesday, Wednesday was a little overcast and cloudy, and I hope the sun comes out today. We've had some every day is nice, but we've had some days.
Oh, did it get like
But
to?
for us, you have to understand that for us, what is a cloudy day is warm in other
Yeah,
places.
that's what I was gonna say. Oh, did it get down to 60? Oh, did you have to put?
Yeah, if
I
it's
mean,
like
you're
it
worried
was
about.
63 degrees.
Ah.
And one of my athletes called, said, "Coach, it's cold."
Where's
So
that indoor facility?
yeah,
I mean, you're. I think you're wearing a long sleeve now for crying out loud.
I'm always
Oh
cold.
my Lord.
It's 70 degrees and I'm freezing. That's
My,
not a joke. My athletes make fun of me all the time. It could be sunshine. I'm always wearing long sleeve. I'm covered up all the time.
My favorite memory, it was kind of a surreal moment. It was actually Christmas Day, 1999. Brent McFarland, the head coach of Canada, Canadians national team, invited me over to work with the junior team in San Diego, and we're on the beach. It's Christmas Day. Literally in this little cove are dolphins. I mean, I'm a bumpkin from Alabama, so I'm just like, what in the world? And then it's raining, but it's raining ash. There was a fire. And so here I am, Christmas Day. We're working out on the beach, dolphins. I was like, I don't think it gets any better than right here at San Diego. I fell in love at that exact point.
I can't complain, which is, probably part of the reason why I've been here for so long
Yeah, that's right.
is that, for as expensive as it is to live in San Diego, and it makes no sense to me, they do make us pay that sunshine tax. You know, it's a pretty good life. I say it's a
Absolutely.
good easy life living here in San Diego, outside of how expensive it is.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, you deserve that. And let's find out how you got to San Diego. Sheila, my favorite question is literally my very first question here. We kind of get in our Wayback Machine. And I just like to start with, for track and field, where does that even start for you as far as, and you get to pick where it starts as an athlete, wherever, where does that start for you in track and field?
I've probably told this story a million times in different interviews. So, um, Mike, I like you a lot, and I've known you for a long time. So I'll probably tell the not so canned answer to this question of how it all started. And the whole 12 years old, I saw the Olympics on TV and wanted to be an
Mm-hmm.
Olympian after that. That's pretty much my story in a nutshell about my exposure to the Olympics,
Mm-hmm.
was seeing a female athlete on TV playing a sport and knowing like, oh, I that's the first time I was ever seeing women on television playing a sport, and I was very athletic, and I thought that was, oh, I want to do that, or I think I can do that one day. And that was at the age of 12. And that was 84. That was the 84 Olympic Games, when I saw Olympic Games.
Yeah.
But my exposure to track and field is a little different because I was a really shy kid growing up. I was that teacher's pet kid that didn't talk a lot, but was bright. I would
Mm-hmm.
say that I was good in school, and I was, a little bit of an introvert as a young kid.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I was always very good at sports. So PE was one of I love PE. And my exposure to the sport of track and field probably came in middle school. I was living at that time living with my grandparents. I had some back and forth in my younger years between my mom and my grandparents, and so
Yeah. Same. Yeah.
not the most stable situation
Mm-hmm.
when I was young. And so I was in middle school, and I was always, I remember being in grade school, like they'd be playing kickball and, I'd be the first, in the beginning it was like the first girl picked and then eventually become the first person picked, just because you're fast. And so that kind of proceeded where I kind of had a little bit of my confidence in that one aspect of like, oh, I know I'm fast,
Hmm.
uh, was there, but I had no exposure to track and field at that time. Got to junior high school and I was in I don't think it's my eighth grade, seventh or eighth grade history class or something. And one of the girls in my class, I went to school, by the way, in Albuquerque, in junior high in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Is that right?
So, yeah, so I'm a Valley girl, meaning that we're a military family.
Mm.
And so the Kirkland Air Force Base was very big.
Yep.
My family retired there in Albuquerque,
Hmm.
um, right around when I was born. And so my younger years were spent well, primarily in Albuquerque. My grandparents were there as well. And and so I grew up around a bunch of like cholos and and Chicanos. I won't say
Uh-huh.
Mexicans because in New Mexico they're Chicanos and they're
Uh-huh.
cholos. And so, my I'm eating, enchiladas, so I'm growing up around a very Latino
Hmm.
Chicano culture outside of my home.
Right, right.
In my home is, we are who we are. And and so one of my friends in class one day, we PE, it's always that, I'm getting picked for sports and playing different things. And one girl just said, "Hey, Sheila, Sheila, you should come to my track team. You should come out and run." And that was my first like, oh, okay. And she took me out to visit her track club, which at the time was called Albuquerque Olympic Club, which was the probably the oldest, besides the Duke City Dashers, the older than Duke City Dashers, oldest track club in Albuquerque at the time. You might know my boy that used to work at Mondo. Gosh, Neil Silva. Do you know Neil Silva?
Yeah. Hmm.
Neil, do you know Neil?
Uh-huh.
Neil is from Albuquerque, and
Wow.
he coached the Duke City Dashers when I was a kid,
Hmm.
and he's actually still coaching there right now at St. Pius High School. So I still talk to
Yeah,
Neil. Love
that's
Neil.
nice. Yep.
But she invited me out to this practice, AOC, we called it. And AOC was the track club where we practiced in the valley with, all the quote unquote poor kids. And we had no sidewalks. We had a dirt track.
Yeah.
Everybody had a dirt track back then, but like we can't say that we were the most affluent track club at all, but we trained hard, we had fun, and we went places. And
Wow.
so that was my first exposure of to track was that my friend invited me out. Must have been my seventh grade year. And I went out to the track team and, you know, my grandparents, got me the uniform, everything. And I started competing. I didn't got my butt kicked all the time the first year.
Okay, so I was going to ask, did you initially like it? But that's kind of a not a great question sometimes because when we succeed at a sport, especially at a young age, right off the bat, well, we tend to like because we like winning, especially as seventh graders, eighth graders. But you got this is hard to believe. You got your butt kicked?
Well, when you're like, I didn't know, like my first exposure to track was that I just knew that I was fast. I just
Right.
know that I could beat the boys. And so, and sometimes the boys didn't like me because I could beat them. There's had
Sure.
all that kind of like, I'm the shy kid that, they try to hit you hard and do all these things when you're playing
Oh
football.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I didn't know. So I was running, they had to put me in the 100, they put me in 200. Heck, I used to get my butt kicked every week in my first, not even my first year, but not the full year in club track, by somebody from the Duke City Dashers.
Hmm.
And every weekend, we'd go to practice, and I don't know what we did to practice at that time, but we go to track meets on the weekends, and I get second place, get second place, second place, and then I remember the first time I won when I finally beat this one girl. I never lost again, of course.
Nice.
When you finally beat that one girl, and you kind of then the light switch goes off, like, you know, oh, I'm good.
Hmm.
And mind you, I'm still a very much a introverted, shy kid,
Hmm.
except around the people that I know. And so um, it was always pretty cool because I was always nervous at the
Hmm.
same time.
Hmm.
Like I was always very nervous and scared, but at the same time, my confidence was growing. So when I finally beat this girl from Duke City Dashers, my whole club was excited, of course. And then from there on, I started to really kind of get into track when I won.
Hmm. I'm I love that you have this time at Albuquerque because I am fascinated with Albuquerque and New Mexico track history, and I have no attachment to it. I've never, I've been there several times,
Mhm.
obviously, but never lived there. But when I first went there for the New Mexico Track and Field Cross Country Coaches Association with
Yeah,
Spencer Sealshot, and I started looking at like the Hall of Fame of New Mexico, and I was like, wait a minute,
yeah,
there are some dudes in our sport that are from New Mexico, from the Mario Cetanas. Obviously, the Henry
yeah,
family obviously has a huge
yeah.
influence there. Curtis B. I mean, it was just like there was such a list, and I was like, wait, this is not the most populated state in the world
There's
here,
Curtis
folks.
Beach. There's she's a friend of mine now. There's a lawyer. Gosh, she's a lawyer. She's a judge. She's a retired judge. Lives in Arizona now. Right? I hope she doesn't see this. She's blanking out her name. She just came to visit me a few months ago. But yeah, there's quite a few.
It's amazing. You expect
Notable
it
Gay. There's
from,
a golfer. There's lots of. There's
yeah.
the Unser family
Yeah.
is from there.
When you think of Texas and California and Florida, it's like, well, of course, such and such came from theirs. But New Mexico, again, I just blown away because of population. It's amazing. So as soon as you said Albuquerque, I lit up because I was like, of course, that's awesome. I really love that. Did you go through high school in Albuquerque as well?
I did.
Is that all right? What high school did you go to there?
I went to Rio Grande High School. I'm a Rio
Yeah,
Grande Raven. I used to
yeah.
joke when I got to San Diego, it's live in the 505 because I used to take my kids back there to compete at UNM's track there at the
Uh-huh.
convention center. But yeah, I'm a Valley girl. I'm a very proud. When I say a Valley
Wow.
girl, I'm a very proud Valley girl from Albuquerque because
Yeah.
my first medal was a Pan American Games medal that I won. I actually dedicated that back to my high school. And the reason why I'm such a um, proud of my community that I came from is because, like I said, we were probably quote unquote the worst high school in the city kind of thing. When I say we're in the valley, it's like predominantly a Chicano,
Hmm.
low mid to lower income family. We're a military family, so we were okay,
Right.
but it was such a community. I would tell you that all the teachers that I had in my high school were my role models. I
Hmm.
never had an athlete or a celebrity or someone famous be somebody that I looked up to. I
Yeah.
always remember very distinctly looking up to the people that were like in my community
Right.
and that were around me, or like my friend's mom who helped me
Yeah.
because I was such a kid that like I said, I was athletic and ended up becoming popular in high school, of course, and then growing in confidence because I was introverted and kind of had a struggle as a child in terms of my how I connected with people,
Mm.
that people took care of me. Like I
Yeah.
had so many people that helped me along the way in that community that I'm extremely proud of, when people talk about people from the Valley in New Mexico and Albuquerque, and I'm a standout person. They'll say, no, it was a great community for me.
Yeah, I love that. You mentioned being very localized with your heroes and things like that. But you mentioned as a 12-year-old seeing another black female win a race, and that was a big deal to you. That's something I actually think about here with the podcast. I'm a big advocate of female coaches and a big advocate of minority coaches because I look at our sport, and these are big blanket statements here. Obviously, there's some more nuance into it, but I look at our sport, and we're roughly 50% male and 50% female. And then I look at our coaches and we're not close to 50-50 at all. And same thing, I look at our sport and again, don't come at me for the nuances here, people. I'm being very blanket when I say these statements, but we're 50% white and 50%, I used to say black. I probably should say minority because, again, there's other minorities in there. But then I look at our coaches and I don't see 50% white, 50% minority. So, but what I found fascinating through some of the amazing women and minority coaches that I've had here on the podcast, from Karen Dennis, Sue Humphreys, a lot of them have a very similar story to what you said there, of specifically with coaching, of like, I either was coached by a female or a black female or black coach in general, or I didn't. And then when I finally saw one, it was like this light bulb of like, oh, wait a minute. That means I can become that. I think it's more powerful than sometimes we give credit for, of seeing someone that looks like you in a position to make you even believe that you could
Well,
attain that kind of position. Whether it's you mentioned a lawyer, a coach, a teacher, etc. It's really
yeah,
it's dawned on me here in the last few years just how important that really, really is.
I think for sure, especially, I'd say more back in those days, Karen's Day for sure.
Mm,
In mine, the sports and women in sports and just in leadership positions has changed so much. I can tell you from the time I was 12 years old. Now, I was 12 years old watching the '84 Olympic Games. I had not gone out for club track yet.
right.
My friend in my classroom had not invited me to come out yet. I was still just a kid at my grandma's, den watching the Olympic Games and going, oh, I knew I was athletic. Oh, whoa, it's the first time I'd like seen women on TV playing a sport because there was no WNBA, there was no
Right.
like volleyball, beach volleyball.
Right.
There was no, there may have been tennis, but I wasn't like really watching tennis. But there was no representation of women playing sports on TV professionally.
Good point.
At that time, I thought, oh, it's a possibility. And then my friend invited me out, in that seventh grade, 13-year-old year, invited me out to run track. And I really gravitated toward it. But in 10 years, Mike, I would say from the time I was probably 12 until the time I was 22, 21, graduated from college, um, women's sports in general had changed completely.
Mm,
Like by the time I graduated from college, there was much more than there was when I was 12, representation of
right.
female athletes on sport. I'm not talking about black, I'm just talking about women,
Right.
period.
Right. 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 Yeah. I love that. That's so cool. Did you, so you mentioned being a sprinter and, spoiler alert, if you don't know Sheila Burrell at all athletically, was I almost said a multi. She was a great heptathlete, multi events here. Did you do any of those in high school or did you stay sprinter and multis came later?
I didn't I didn't learn how to. In high school, my state record just got broken 2 years ago by this girl named Tatum, who
Wow.
went to Arizona State. Who runs for Dion right now, who's doing a fantastic job.
Nice. Yes. Love that.
Um, and so I ran the 100, I ran the 200, I high jumped, I long jumped.
Yeah. Okay.
And on occasion, I ran a 400 probably once or twice. Mario Satania, who, by the way, I used to have a big crush on in high school. Uh,
Shut up.
Shout out to Mario. He knows this. We joked about it. We've joked about it for years. He went to LSU. I went to UCLA. His parents were big in the New Mexico High School Athletic Association. His mom was a volleyball coach, and she coached our North South All Star team. His dad, I think, was in administration, but his dad was involved in athletics as well. And so the Satanias will tell you the 1 400 they saw me run in high school, where I was like, you should be a 400-meter runner. I was like, no.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Forget that.
I did a high jump and a long jump.
Yeah.
I didn't even know what a heptathlon was until I
Right.
got to
Sure. Yeah. Sure. Did you, any other sports? I mean, you were athletic,
I
so
played, no, I actually was recruited in three sports. And
recruited for
so
college.
I was recruited for college in three sports. So I was recruited in high
Holy.
school to play volleyball, um, track, and basketball. And the
Wow.
two that I was most recruited for were volleyball and track. Basketball, I was probably not D1 level in basketball because I was just fast and I missed a bunch of shots. I could hit some layups. So I don't say I was I can say I was athletic and probably could have became a better basketball. It's my favorite sport was basketball.
Hmm.
But I was probably in terms of recruitable at a higher level it was volleyball and track that
Wow.
I got
Huh.
the most interest in.
So what did, as you were looking to go into college and you're being recruited for volleyball, you're recruited by track, talk to us about how you ended up choosing UCLA. And one of my second favorite question, my first one's always, how did you even get in track, is what were you thinking about as an 18-year-old? It still baffles me that we make 18-year-olds pick majors that are, to affect their whole lives. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But what were you thinking about majoring in as far as like, oh, I'm going to become a journalist, a business owner, a doctor? What were you thinking about 18 as you're going through the recruiting process? 17, 18.
Let me tell you who recruited me, and then I'll tell you kind of. So I started getting volleyball interest probably my junior year um, in high school. My volleyball coach who passed away, who was basically a mother to me,
Mm.
who stayed in high school coaching until I graduated from high school just so she can kind of help me through the process. Sandra D, I called her. And so from volleyball, basketball, and track, my track, it was just too much for me. My recruiting process was horrible, first of all. Let me tell you, my recruiting process was not the best experience for me.
Hmm.
And it wasn't the best experience for me because I was doing it on my own,
Mm.
meaning that my family had no idea what this was about.
Are you first, I don't know what you call it, generation? Are you first college student in your,
Yes.
yeah, I get it. Yep. Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
mean, my grandparents raised me. I was living with my
Mm-hmm.
grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
My mom was around, but and she was there on some of the visits. But my family was not, you know, invested in, yeah, you're going to college, but
Mm-hmm.
what does all this mean?
Right.
Um, and my my main source of support was someone made by Nicolette Dennis, woman named Glenaba, and was my high school teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Those were because our AD, those were the people that I was talking to. But other than that, like I was torn between like, I was being recruited by Bob Kersee at UCLA, Gary Winkler
Oh,
at Illinois,
jeez.
Pat Henry at LSU. I took one visit where they were going to let me play volleyball and run track because I was smart enough to know that I need to run track instead of play volleyball. But I took one visit where I took a visit to a school that wanted me to recruit to go to both places. And then I stopped visiting schools.
Well, hold on there. Why did you say you were smart enough to know track versus volleyball? Are you talking about like, hindsight's 2020, look what track did for
No, no,
me?
no.
Or
At the time, I was a little, I would say that I was very intentional and practical about how I had to take care of myself a little bit when I was younger. And so I was very intentional and practical about what I wanted my life to be. I knew what I didn't want to do in my life. I know what I wanted in my life and what I didn't. And so when I stopped taking visits. After four, I was like, I don't want to take any more. Um, I knew choosing between, let's go back to when I'm choosing between sports. You want basketball, volleyball, track. I knew this. Even before, you know, I decided to go, I knew this, that if I wanted to be a professional athlete in any way, that the only sport that I saw on TV where I saw a professional athlete or a woman on TV was track and field.
right.
So that had always been in my mind from being a young kid.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew that, hey, I can go play basketball. I said this logically in my head. I can go play basketball. But after I finish college, what am I going to do?
Yeah, right. Done. Mm-hmm.
I can go play volleyball, but after college, what am I going to do?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
If I go to college and I run track, I have the possibility,
Right.
opportunity to go to
Yeah.
the Olympics.
Hmm.
And so immediately I already knew that I wasn't going to play any other sport in college except track, but I went to the one school that gave me the option of doing both. I
Mm-hmm.
visited that school. Um, and so I already knew that like I was going to go to the track path. And then once I took those four visits from Illinois, UCLA, LSU, and at the school is Wyoming.
Hmm.
I went to visit Wyoming. They had a decent volleyball team at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, but I couldn't go to Wyoming. One of my high school, one of the girls from my state who I played volleyball with went to play volleyball there, and I couldn't go to Wyoming, Mike, because like I may have grown up around a bunch of Chicanos and Latinos and stuff like that, but I didn't see a single black person when I went there on a visit. I was just
Sure.
I went to visit there, and they were really nice people. I just was like, this is the most uncomfortable
Sure.
situation ever. I was like, not going there. So after that was my last visit, I was like, you know what? I don't need to visit any place else.
Hmm.
And so my thought process, because I think I'm still like this very much. My thought process is this. I said, okay, and it was hard. Let me tell you, my recruiting process was difficult because I didn't have the support and I had all this,
Mhm.
chatter back and forth. People hated, during that time there was the negative recruiting was strong.
Hmm.
So how do you handle the negative recruiting? Like people are telling me bad things about this coach. People told me bad things. Everybody told me bad things about the same
Yeah.
coach.
Everybody was terrible. Right. Yeah. Except for the person talking to you at the time. Right. Right.
And you're getting phone calls at night, you're getting people telling you what they think you should do and what you should do. And then
Mhm.
the little information my family did have wasn't, I don't know if it was, you know, misinformation or,
Mhm.
it was just
And don't forget for everybody listening, this is a pre-internet time. So you're not Googling anything. You are to your point there, Sheila, phone calls, other people, that's your information. A letter every once in a while. That's all the information you can get.
that's all the information you get. And it's just the phone calls were overwhelming. Um, the home visits were okay, but overwhelming. Um, for me.
Mhm.
Now, mind you, I'm this track athlete who, in my state who's very, everybody knows who you are and I've got a little bit of swag, but I was still the same kid,
Mm,
still very, you know, somewhat introverted,
right.
but everybody knows my name.
Hmm.
And so it was emotionally hard for me because I didn't know what to do. And it was like people were calling me, telling me you have to make a decision. They're telling you have to make a decision. Like you got to do. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I don't know what to do because you're saying this about this coach, you're saying this about that coach, and this school, and da 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 da. It was hard. So my very good friend to this day, Nikki Dennis, who was my English teacher, my freshman English teacher, who becoming like my best friend, who becoming my sister. We're still like, the babysat her kids, the whole thing, house sat. And so me and Nikki are still pretty close. Um, and so my friend, I call my friend now, Nikki Dennis, and she really, really, really helped me figure this out. Um, and so I was very logical. I'm very logical about a lot of things.
Hmm.
Very logical about it. So it came down to this. Okay, if I go to this school and I don't do well in track, where would I want to be? Do I want to be in Baton Rouge, Louisiana? Probably not, right? I'm a military kid from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I speak proper English. Like I articulate my words. Um, I'm exposed. I have a lot of exposure. I believe in exposure as a young. My teachers one thing my teachers taught me. This is why I love them so much. And I always tell this to my kids who are in this situation that it's not necessarily where you're at right now, what you're doing right now is not who you are. And so the more I can expose you to different ways of thinking and seeing the
Yeah.
world, the better. Because if I would have kept my mindset where I was in that time of my life, I don't know where I would be.
Right.
But I fortunately had people around me who exposed me to so many different things, like even foods. I was amazed the first time I went and had sushi. Nikki took me to eat sushi. Like the Japanese, it was for me, it was like as a young kid coming from where I'd come from, or was coming from, it was like a big deal, like, oh wow, people eat different foods with different, like it was that simple for me.
Right.
And so, and just in arts and reading books, I was a big reader. I ended up being an English major in college. I had a teacher who exposed me to reading books. So I read a lot. And so I read literature, I read novels, I read teen novels. I read a lot as a young adult, teenager. And
Mhm.
so my exposure to like there is a world much bigger than what I'm living right here. That when I was going to college, I was thinking to myself, okay, if I go to Baton Rouge, Pat Henry was great, I know the Henry family. There was definitely a connection there.
Right. Yeah.
I know Matt and Matt, every time I see Matt, give him a hug, you know, the whole family. One of his sister-in-laws works at the airport, the whole thing, right? So I knew the Henrys well enough. And Pat was at LSU at the time. Uh, Gary Winkle, actually really, really liked Illinois. Like if I wouldn't say I'd do it again differently. I don't think I'd go back and do it, but I really, really did like Gary
Right.
in Illinois. And I liked the team. And the thing about Illinois for me wasn't that it had nothing to do with coaching. None of my decisions had anything to do with coaching or the team. The reason I went to college or the college I went to had nothing to do with how good the team was or the coaching. It all had to do with how I saw myself in the future. And so I thought, this is me in my mind. Thankful, Nikki. Like if I go to Champaign, it's okay. But I didn't like that flight. You have to catch one flight and another flight to get to Champaign.
Yeah,
Like you
that
get
has
on
not
one flight
changed.
and get on a smaller airplane
Yep.
to get to the college. And I thought, like, what am I going to do in Illinois if track doesn't work out? Like, who am I going to meet? Like, where am I going to get to people? Right? This is my
This is
18,
great.
17, 18-year-old brain.
Yeah.
And so the only school, and even though like I went on my recruiting visit, I met Bob Kersee, I met Jackie Joyner Kersee, did all things in LA. I was
Dude.
not at all impressed with the fact that JJK, I didn't know who JJ was really. I knew she was an Olympian, but I didn't grasp the magnitude of
JJK. Right, right,
who
right, right.
Jackie was. And I just knew everybody hated Bobby. Like every college coach in the country hated Bobby at the time.
That might not have changed too much in today in 2024,
I think so now. I think
2025.
people love him now. But back then,
You, Bobby, if you're
nobody did anything.
listening, you know I love you. You know
No,
what I'm talking about.
I
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
love
yeah,
and
yeah.
respect
Yes,
Bobby's
yes,
and
yes.
Jackie. Like
Yes.
I probably talk
Greatest
about
people in the
Jackie more in
world.
my career
Yes.
than I talk about anybody else. But everybody hated Bobby. Every college coach
Yeah.
in the country hated Bobby at the time. At least I was recruiting against him. Um, and so I wasn't that much impressed with the whole like it's UCLA and they won all these
Yeah.
championships. Bob Kersey's the coach. Like that's all. It's a plus.
LA, the whole thing. Yeah. Hmm.
But in my mind, my little like thinking about my life blind and wanting to change my life was like, okay, if track doesn't work out, and I just get a degree. Where in the United States do I want to be where I have an opportunity to be successful?
Hmm.
And I thought in my mind, if something doesn't work out, I get hurt, or, I'm not good, I don't make an Olympics, da 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 da, then, if I'm in LA, I can at least meet people who can help
Right.
me get to where it is I want to be in life.
Huh.
And that's why I chose UCLA.
That's a maybe not an common thought process for a 17-year-old.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Like, probably not. Like, I didn't, I really, I can't tell, I can tell you this. I don't know that LA was the right, I talk about this when I'm recruiting now, was necessarily the right fit for me,
Hmm.
personality wise. I probably should have went with Gary Winkler at Illinois.
Hmm.
If I was gonna, the
Oh,
way I tell
right.
kids right
Yeah.
now, the way I talk to kids right now about choosing your school, I talk about it's got to be a good fit. And da 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 da. Da. I should have went to Illinois if that was the case,
Yeah. That's a good
right?
point. Knowing your personality, knowing Gary, that's a great point, actually.
I should have went to Illinois.
Yeah.
Um, but I chose UCLA, and I chose UCLA. And you choose when to choose the school you choose, what you want out of it, you're going to get out of it.
Right.
I wouldn't
Right.
say necessarily that UCLA um, was the right fit for me in terms of uh, like I can just naturally grow because I struggled at UCLA the first couple of years.
Mm.
Like I really struggled. I struggled socially.
Mm.
I struggled socially at UCLA. I struggled, you know, athletically. I knew I had serious imposter syndrome for the first couple of years.
Mm.
Um, of course they wouldn't know this, but I felt like God, all these people are really Angela Burnham was on my team, Jeanette Vickers was on my team, Tanya Sedgwick was on my team. I mean,
Mm.
Godina was a freshman the same year I was. Meb was a freshman the same year I was. Karen
Hmm.
Hickox was NCAA. I mean, I had serious imposter syndrome the first couple of years.
Hmm.
Uh,
Talk about that a little bit because that's an interesting concept. Imposter syndrome is beyond athleticism. It's our whole world. It goes
yeah,
into what kind of partner you are, a parent, a business person, whatever your job, teacher. They have imposter syndrome. I mentioned before we hit record here. So by the time you're listening to this, it's probably the week before. We had Michelle Freeman, the women's relays coach, on, and she was talking about the recruiting class. She went to South Carolina and like all these studs, the Lashinda Demas, and I mean, just she was naming names. I was like, oh my God, that's right, I forgot about her and her and her and her, and I was like, how did you and her sister, who was equally as good athletically, like that can be intimidating. I mentioned I wish so. This is probably 2 weeks in a row. You've heard me tell this study that I can't. I need to go actually find the study. I remember reading an abstract of a study about really, really smart kids that go to Ivy Leagues, right? If you go to Harvard, Cornell, Yale, you're the top. You're valedictorian and all these kind of things, and that the instance of dropout and there's no other better way of suicide was higher because these kids were all the big fish in whatever pond. It doesn't even have to be a small pond, but they were the valedictorian. They were all the smartest, and then they go to a Harvard, et cetera, an Ivy League school, and they're surrounded by a whole bunch of geniuses. I mean, they're all geniuses that are at these schools, and sometimes you can and can't handle that. You're now the 100th person in your class versus number one because those other 99s are geniuses like you. Michelle talked about like iron sharpens iron was one of her quotes. Like I wanted to get beat at practice all the time. So she doesn't necessarily have imposter syndrome. That I'm more in line with you of like when I get around other like coaches. When I was a coach, when I'd get around Pats and Bobby's and all them, I'd be like, who am I? Come on, these dudes they're the best. How did you handle you mentioned the people that you're in you're in Hollywood USA for track and field at this time. This was an amazing time at
yeah, yeah.
UCLA.
I mean, of course, out there, there's when I went to college, it was Jack had already set the world record. She was there. Gail did the home visit. Gail was a volunteer assistant with Bobby when I was a senior in high school. She did my home
Wow.
visit. So
Wow.
Gail Devers and Bobby came out and did my home visit for UCLA. Um, and so there were still, Kenny Harrison was there. I mean, they were still all the who's who of track and field
It
was
was
at UCLA.
amazing, right?
Yeah, and John was down there coaching everybody. Otto's the same year as I am.
Right. Yeah.
Uh, so it was who's who of track and field back then. And when I say I had imposter syndrome, it wasn't that I didn't think I was good enough. I really had a different perspective. When I say UCLA I'm very proud of going to UCLA and I'm grateful for it and I don't regret it all. But it wasn't like a natural fit for me in the sense
Mm.
of my imposter syndrome wasn't that I wasn't good enough, um, because I knew I was talented. Like, still this introverted, but yet, everybody knows my name kind of kid. I knew that I was talented. My confidence was shaken, um, because I don't like being the spotlight one. I don't like attention. I didn't like attention
Mm.
at the time, one. But it was more so from the perspective of I thought that, and I remember thinking this because Bobby used to like talk shit and like try to get me going. Like he, try to play those mind games with
Mhm.
me, which intimidated me. I was scared of Bobby I would tell you, I was scared of Bobby for 2 years at least.
Sure. Yeah.
Like I was just scared, straight
Hmm.
up. I think some of my kids might feel like that now, but I was just scared. Um, is that it was that I thought that I'm not supposed to be good yet.
Hmm.
Like I needed time. Like I'm supposed to come in and I'm supposed to be like I'm supposed to be here to learn the first couple of years. So I was thinking,
Right.
it's just not
Right.
my time yet.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Um, like Janine Vickers was a bronze medalist my freshman year in college. By the time I was a junior, I was like, okay, I'm ready now. I belong here, or I'm supposed to
Mm.
be here. It's my time. But my first couple of years, they were testing me. I've never done the heptathlon before. Bobby was teaching me how to throw shot put, throw javelin. I've never hurdled before. I had to
Right.
learn how to hurdle. I went to hurdle. I actually made it to nationals by my junior year in college, but I didn't hurdle till I got to college.
Hmm.
So there were events in the multi that I had not done till I got to college.
Hmm.
Um, and so it was still this kind of like I used to say this, there's a totem pole,
Hmm.
all the professionals that were there, and I felt like I was the lowest person on the totem pole, and I had to wait my turn.
Right.
And so I acted like that.
Yeah. Because there's a fine line between Sheila going in there going, oh, well, I'm gonna beat all of y'all. I'm gonna be the top of the totem pole, whether you are, whether it works
Yeah.
out that way or not, versus, so there's a fine line between humility and bad ego and is it my
Yeah.
time? But I mean, you've seen it. Luckily, there's some freshmen you've had that thank God they didn't
Yeah.
think I had to wait and they went on and did great things as a
Yeah.
freshman. It's a imposter syndrome it fascinates me. It's a very complex. It's not just I was good enough or not good enough. It's timing, like, oh, I'm a freshman, my time will come, blah blah blah. Yeah, it's a very complex thing.
No, I seriously had that because I'd be like, dang, all these people are out here at my track. And,
Hmm.
I was just happy, like, let me just do it. And I also struggled socially, in LA my first couple years because, I came from a community that was a community. Like, I remember being in the car with one of my teammates driving one time, and we saw a car accident on the side of the road. And, the police hadn't gotten in. And I was like, how come nobody's stopping to help this person? I was like, well, shouldn't somebody stop and help them?
Right.
Like, why is nobody helping? Like, that was me. Like, what are these people? Who are these people?
Right, right. Yeah.
Uh, that was one. And then two, I struggled because, you know, I'll tell you, my good friends, my close friends in college were like from one was from Michoacan and one was from Osaka, two were Mexican. The other one was from Nicaragua, and the other one was from another one was Raquel, who's black and spoke Spanish.
Mhm.
You know? And so, just kind of growing, I just hadn't really was still growing into my identity
Right.
as well those first couple of years. And so I think that LA was the best place for me to be long term, but at the time it took some adjustment. So if
Right.
I'm recruiting a kid right now, I wouldn't tell a kid to go. If it was me, I'd be like, I think Champaign, Illinois would probably be a better, smaller environment,
Did you
college
ever,
town.
it fascinates me today's world of sports in general for college, the whole transfer portal and things like that. But, kids have transferred from the day one, right? Did you ever think about transferring? Did it ever get
Never.
overwhelming? Never.
Let me tell you something about Bob Kersee. Is that I don't care what I mean. Bobby may have done some like I can't believe that, but I will say this that um, my time at UCLA was great, and being able to uh, work with Bobby, and of course, the person I ended up looking up to is Jackie. Jackie became like one of my idols, I would say,
Of course.
over those years. Is that he always took care of me.
Hmm.
He might cut you out 1 minute, but let me tell you, um, I say this, I appreciate the fact that I don't, we never had a conversation about it, I don't think, but even as I struggled, he never let me struggle to the point in college, to the point of like I want to leave this place.
Mm.
And so I will say that. And the other thing I'll say about that experience at UCLA, like I don't know if I should say this, but like I used to tell people I had PTSD for the first couple of years. I didn't want to go back because it was hard.
Mm.
Like it was hard. We got came an All-American, learned how to go to nationals in the multis. Our team got second or third at NCAA's. We had a great team, great athletes on our team, did fantastic, but it was hard.
Mm.
Like these kids don't know. Like it was hard. I'm a Pac-10 champion in 100 meters because I got my ass cussed out right before the race. And if I didn't win, I'd rather have the consequences. I didn't want to have the consequences of not winning
Right.
as opposed to winning.
Right.
I was not built like a sprinter. All these sprinters all out. I was like, I know I better score points and I better win. So, I didn't want the blue rings and the spit, and I didn't want any of that because I was too sensitive for that stuff. I didn't want to get cussed out.
Did,
But
did
um,
you, I think, your identity for me becomes what I just know of people, right? So like for me, it's like, oh, you're from San Diego because I've always known you from San Diego State and you're a multi, right? But you just mentioned you won the 100 meters at Pac-10, but you were training as a heptathlete. What was, and you had the greatest heptathlete,
dude,
by the way, JJK.
like
How did all that?
I did anything that man told me to do.
Mm,
He was like run the 400. I was on the 4x4. I mean, I split 52 seconds on the 4x4. You
mm,
want to run 4x4? Okay, Sheila, do it. You need somebody to go and run the 4x1, I get it. If you want to split, I did it. I did whatever he
mm,
told me to do, as opposed to these kids nowadays. I was that person, like I was a good athlete. I was a good all-around athlete,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
Um, and it took me a while to grasp some things. Like high jump under Bobby just never clicked for me. Um, there's a guy named Alan Hinkle who's down in LA right now, who we brought in as a redshirted a year, who really I had some success in high jump with him, but it never clicked for me. Even though Bobby coached Amy Acuff, Amy is doing
Is
great.
that right? Oh, I didn't know that. Oh,
He has
wow.
a team with Amy.
Hmm.
Um, and so he never, there's some certain events that didn't click with me and him, but overall, like I became a badass because of Bobby.
Hmm.
There's just that there's no option.
And you mentioned, I think you said you either got an English degree or you started. So English, what was the thought?
Got an English
English
degree.
teacher or?
No, I thought when I went into college, I thought, okay, I want to go into business because I knew I wanted to travel.
Hmm.
So let me see if I get into business. But as a kid, I told you I did a lot of reading, did a lot of writing, so on and so
Right.
forth. Heavily influenced by some of my English and lit teachers in high school. Ended up becoming an English major. Um, got my degree in English literature. I thought I was going to become a professor. My goal at that point was I'm going to become I didn't want to teach kids. I was like, I want to teach adults
Yeah.
because, I'd rather communicate with people. And so I thought I was going to become a professor. I'm going to go get a PhD and I'm going to be
Is
a college
that
professor.
right? What,
That's what
so
I thought I wanted to do.
it was going to be Dr. Burrell talking about the classics, the Latin class. I assume people in that realm of studies, like you very niche into.
I was going to do poetry. Mine would be poetry.
Is that right?
Mhm.
So you have written poetry?
I used to write a lot. I used to write a lot.
Love that. So cool.
Used to write a lot.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's really cool. I love that. What changed? uh,
You know what ended up happening? I'll tell you what changed is very clearly while at UCLA, I ended up I liked, I liked teaching. I was pretty good at explaining things and and I ended up one year, back then he said, well, you're not allowed to make money, right? But I did personal training. I ended up doing a lot of personal training. I did a lot of personal training because I ended up meeting this guy. Um, the guy I was dating at the time was a trainer at a really, you know, at a a resort over in Brentwood, California, where he ran the gym there. And so he and I dated, and then he sort of taught me how to, train people. And
mhm,
then from there, then I started teaching this thing where I can teach you how to fly. So I take all these like Hollywood executives' wives and stuff like that out to UCLA's track and teach them how to sprint. And so I'd make my $30, I'd be stashing $30 a session, all cash, you know, in my room, basically teaching people how to run.
huh,
And then in the gym, I'd go in the gym with him in the mornings and I'd teach people how to lift weights. And then any of my freshman teammates or anybody I saw struggling on the track, I'd like bring them out on the track, like without the coaches knowing, say, this is what, because
Yeah.
Jeanette Bolden becoming our head coach my fifth year.
Mm,
And so I was team captain. I was team captain that year. My last year of college, I think I was team captain. And so, along the way, there'd be like people who didn't quite get it. And so I'd be like, okay, come on, I'm going to show you what they're talking about.
mm,
And so I began coaching, basically teaching, coaching
mm.
in college.
Did you find yourself, knowing your experience, your first couple of years at UCLA, did you find yourself as you started finding yourself junior and senior year, gravitating towards freshmen and sophomores that like, oh, they're struggling a little bit, whether it's what Bobby or Jeanette wanted or the
No, it just kind of
LA?
happened. Yeah, it
Yeah.
just kind of happened organically because at that point, I was, life is lifing, but like it's only be in a situation where, I'd taken on the role. I think it was my senior year where I became the team captain. Um, and it was Jeanette's first year as a head coach. So Bobby was still around. There were definitely some transitional things that
Mm,
were going on. And it just became like somebody had to lead by example.
mm,
Even if you're not the best person on the team, you got to lead by example.
right.
And so it just sort of I didn't intentionally gravitate toward the freshmen because we had some good freshmen. God, Camille Noel, who's from Canada, was on our team as a freshman, and she didn't need any help. You know, and so it was usually just it was not us. It was the ones who came in like we're trying to make the team kind of situation. So
Well, instead of becoming a doctor of poetry, you got really good at track and ended up having a really good professional career. How did you tell me about the transition? Because again, I pigeonhole people, right? So to me, you are a Cliff Rovelto disciple. I love that Bobby was there because Bobby's on my bucket list. I really would like to be able to put Bobby's journey on wax for what he's been through in this great profession. But Cliff, who has been on the podcast, that's how I think I first met you at like a level two, I think, or maybe at the Olympic Training Center. Somewhere I met you.
was I with Cliff?
You were with Cliff, and so it's
I was
like,
his
oh,
assistant. I
you're
was being Cliff's. I was following Cliff
okay,
around
all
everywhere,
right. So, but
learning. I was actually learning from Cliff because I was following him around to all of his to coach his education stuff.
Cliff coached you, yeah?
Mhm.
Okay, so how did you transit? Like, how did you find Cliff, and why work with him? And then tell us a little bit about the influence of Cliff, because this is one of my top five mentors for me.
I'm gonna tell you one more story
Please.
about to get to that point, so that because I don't think I've ever said this in an interview, so it can be documented, it can be recorded at some point. So I was looking for something. Is that I remember after I made my first Olympic team, I made my first Olympic team with Coach Rovelto, with Cliff Rovelto
Mm,
in 2000. Um, I had gone and started training down at the Olympic Training Center here in San Diego,
hmm.
back and forth between Manhattan and San Diego for a little bit. Al was down
Oh yeah.
at San Diego coaching.
Hmm.
I'm down at here at the Olympic Training Center coaching at the time. And I will tell you, I left Bob after college. I was still trying to make it. Like the '96 Olympic trials had come up, and I was, still in that space of like I'm in LA. I don't have any money. I don't know where I'm living. I'm working in Hollywood, Gold's Gym, and I'm working in here and there. I'm just trying to hustle. I'm hustling in
Yep.
San Diego. I mean, in
Yep.
LA.
Yep.
So I've been in LA for 14 years, and I'm just hustling, trying to make ends
Mm,
meet. But I'm still want to run. So I remember leaving UCLA, graduating from UCLA. I went and trained with Jane Frederick and Kim Carter for a year
okay.
in Santa Barbara. Jane Frederick, who was a former Olympian in the pentathlon before it became heptathlon, and Kim Carter, who at the time was one of the top five multis in the country.
Okay.
She'd made teams in Santa Barbara. I went to train with Jane Frederick, had no money, was living very roguish. Like my life was just roguish. I'm not even gonna try to cover it up. Like I was just living very roguish,
Hmm.
and like no registration on my car, could barely get my I mean, just
Oh,
living,
dude.
just getting by in LA.
Yeah.
Yeah, in LA was a hustle. Um, and so I had gone back to Bobby because Jane got fed up with me and she basically kicked me off the track. I was always late and traveling back and forth, I'm still trying to be in LA to get to Santa Barbara and I could practice on time. And I'm living with this old woman for $500 a month who I couldn't afford to pay rent. She just let me slide because I kept her company. It was just young in LA. And I tried to I was like, I had this thing in my head that if I'm going to make a Olympic team, Bobby has to coach me.
Hmm.
Like, I'm not, if Bob Kersee doesn't coach me, I'm not, because he coached all the Olympians. This was what was stuck in my head after a while of
Right,
being at
right.
UCLA. If he doesn't coach me, how am I going to make the Olympics? And so I went back to Bobby and, of course, talked to him. Hey, please, can you coach me? And Bobby told me, and this became a very strong motivation for me for a while. Bobby said to me, and I want to say this out loud because I have such admiration and respect for him um, now, and kind of how he influenced me, probably without even knowing it. Bobby said to me, we're going back up to Drake Stadium and sitting in the stands, and he was coaching whoever else was there. The new wave of athletes were there. And he basically said to me, Sheila, I can't coach you because you don't believe you're good enough. Um, he basically said, you don't believe that you're good enough. And in a sense, I took it as he didn't think I was good enough.
Mm,
So in my mind, I was like, he doesn't want to. Oh, this is what he said to me. Actually, I remember now. He says he doesn't want to waste his time coaching someone to score 6,000 points. Those are exact words because I use them.
mm,
Like, it wouldn't be worth his time because he had all these other, like, Bobby was loaded at that time,
right.
loaded with athletes. And he, in his words, said to me, it wouldn't be worth his time to coach someone to only score 6,000 points in the heptathlon.
Hmm.
So that hurt my feelings.
Yeah.
It hurt my feelings because the next year he then began coaching this girl who I thought I was better than to only score 6,000 points. So, can I tell you, for a number of years, and Bobby may not know this, for a number of years, I was training in Northridge with another guy that was used to coach at Northridge um, for a few years when I made my first team, that it was my mission for a number of years, of course, to prove Bobby wrong.
Right.
Like, to prove to him that I was good enough.
Hmm.
And so those early years of, like, my first Pan American game, my first World Championship game for team, you know, first US championship, those first few years was to prove to Bobby that, I was worth his time, but I could score more than 6,000 points
Right.
in the heptathlon. And to bring that full circle is I remember after making my first team, I had come down to San Diego, back and forth between Manhattan, Kansas, and San Diego to train from cliff to here, cliff to here. And Al was down at the training center, and Al had come up to me one time because they saw I have a very strong work ethic. No one could ever say that I don't work my ass off. I had very strong work ethic because I had to be good. That was my mentality. If like I had to be good,
Hmm.
and so it was working hard was never a problem for me.
Hmm.
Um, and so Al had told me one time he had asked Bobby a question. He said, Bobby, can you name one athlete that you feel like you just, you missed, like you misjudged. I don't know what the word, I don't know what the conversation, the word was, but you misjudged. And at that time, early 2000, Bobby said the one athlete that he misjudged was me because I had won a few national US championships, had gone on. I was with Cliff and, I was successful and, made some teams or whatnot. And the one athlete that he misjudged was me.
Hmm.
Um, because, basically my motto at that time is like, I won't fail unless I quit. So the only way I fail is if I quit, and because I
Right.
didn't quit. And so for that was a full circle moment for
Wow.
me in the whole Bob Kersee kind of
Yeah.
relationship where I was just like held a grudge and was like, I'm going to prove him
Yeah.
wrong. From then to come back and maybe not tell me directly, but acknowledge that, hey, you know what? I missed that one. I probably needed that. But and so that's the full like Bob Kersee thing where I took it as like not as like, oh, it crushed me. It motivated me to like really strive to be better.
One of the things that's interesting when you do an interview style like this is, you have clarity now, you have 2020 vision behind you, right? Do you think, and I don't know if you can do these two things at the same time. I don't know. I've never been anywhere remotely close to an athlete like you and your peers during that time. But what I heard you describe is I was working to prove him wrong. And maybe on the other side is I'm working to prove myself right. And again, I'm not sure, and you tell me, I'm not sure those two can be done at the same time.
No, at some point there has to be a flip of the switch.
What's better? Like you always had success with the I'm going to prove him wrong, but then you also had success maybe on the other side that of oh, okay, I'm proving myself right here.
I think that two things, this is cliche things. I think that two things can be true
True.
at the
I agree
same
with
time.
that. Hmm.
And I think that in the beginning, I had a chip on my shoulder.
Hmm.
Like seriously had a chip on my shoulder. Like I was out to just destroy everybody. And part of the arsenal I had in my bag was Bobby's words
Hmm.
for a long time. And then at a certain point, it switched.
Hmm.
At a certain point, it switched to like, I just want to be good.
Hmm.
Back in the day, Mike, don't forget, back in the day, we didn't get paid for this
Right.
the way these kids are now. Like
Right.
I was training and competing, having my uniforms. One of my best friends at the time, we like make up my uniforms. We go get them sewn and made. There's no, I wasn't sponsored. I like
Right.
spent my own money, for entry fees and to get here and there. I wouldn't ask people to help me.
Right.
I was still personal training. My personal training clients helped me get to track meets, helped me get here or there. I wasn't doing this for,
Right.
my sponsor. I was doing this because I wanted to be because I'm that 12-year-old kid. So then it becomes
Yeah.
a kid again.
Yeah.
So you go back to, oh, this is what I want to do one day. After I got over I proved Bobby wrong thing and I've come at peace with that. Like, you know what? This is what I want to do with my life. And I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing at this time.
Did
Like,
you and not it should be fun, but work is not always fun, right? And what you're doing, even as in athletics, being a heptathlete is not always fun. But you talk about cliches. You've heard this about, holding a grudge against someone is like poisoning yourself or holding your own breath and hoping it hurts them. What I'm curious about is I love that you got a full circle where Bobby said, yeah, you know what, the person I missed out on, yeah, I misjudged that one. I like that you got that kind of closure, if you will. And then there's the rest of your career. Did you have more fun in the rest of your career, or in the, you know what, I'm gonna be on that track every day because I'm gonna prove him wrong, style?
no, I would say that I didn't, there was never a point in the process that I was like, this thing with Bobby was like, I was so focused on it that it negatively impacted me.
Good, good, good.
I'm still the same person, still introverted, but everybody knows my
Mm-hmm.
name.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a pretty thoughtful person,
Mm-hmm.
um, and strategic in many ways. And so I would use it when I came to a point where I use it when I needed it,
Mm-hmm.
because there were so many other things. And honestly, like I was having fun. Like I told you, my my life was roguish for a while. So it was like
Mm-hmm.
it was just like, it was I was doing my thing in LA until I got out of LA. And when I got out of LA, when I went to I left LA, went to Manhattan, Kansas with Cliff, it was like a total like life change. I don't think I grew up until I got to Manhattan, Kansas. I actually don't think I grew up and became a mature person until I got to Manhattan, Kansas.
Yeah, I love that you went to Manhattan, Kansas after drubbing my now hometown of Champaign, Illinois, by the way, because you can't get to Manhattan without
I know,
either
right?
a little crop duster, just like we do here in Champaign, or a very long, boring, I've done
Yeah,
it many, many
I am.
times, drive from KC to Manhattan.
Yes.
What I'm curious about, some of the, however you want to define top coaches and such that we've had here on the podcast, the ones I think about, like Cliff, Brooks Johnson, they all describe themselves not as sprints coaches, jumps coaches, throws coaches, that they're track coach. I remember it kind of, not kind of, it changed my perspective when Brooks walked through. He's like, every event's the exact same, Mike. You're trying to move the mass one way or the other, and some are shorter and some are longer. But once you understand that, then you can coach all the events. And it really kind of, I kind of wish I'd heard that when I was a coach back in the day, because I
Hmm.
was very much I was a sprint hurdles coach. I also coached jumps. That was my secondary. That was it. I was sprint hurdles and jumps coach.
Hmm.
How was it with a guy like Cliff? And I'm not, and by the way, this is not a comparison of like Bobby versus Cliff because I don't know
Oh,
Bobby well enough until I get him on the show one day, but I know Cliff real well because he affected my life as a coach tremendously, and we've had him here on a show on the show. How was it with Cliff, who self describes himself as a generalist? He won't tell you that he's a high jumps coach or a
right.
multi or even a multis coach. He's a generalist. How was it working with him? And what I mean by that is in the context of like we know you become a coach, were you picking up things of like, oh, maybe I should be a coach, like I like this style, or how was this mix during that time frame?
I probably learned, um, I I I am the coach. I am the kind of coach that I am. I can probably listen, I've coached my cross country team. I can coach any event on the track except discus and hammer. Um, and I can understand and can conceptualize and theorize how to, maybe not at the highest level, at some level, to do an
Right.
efficient enough job. There are many people who can do that now anymore. Um, is that Cliff, for me, uh, I didn't understand at first. My first year with Cliff, I had no idea. I didn't think I was, he'll tell you, he used to laugh at me because I used to tell him every time, I was like, I'm not working hard enough. Because my whole experience before, Cliff was like, if you're not working hard, what are you doing? Like
Right.
I should be dying at the end of practice every day. I should be
Yeah.
like dragging myself. I should be in pain all the time.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And with Cliff, I'd be like, I'm not doing enough work. I don't feel like I'm running enough. I don't feel like I'm doing enough. I don't feel like I think my kids will feel like that with me sometimes too. Like
Uh-huh.
I'm not doing enough. I'm not working hard enough. I'm
Yep.
not practicing long enough. And so I had a real like anxiety about I'm not doing enough work.
Right.
And and I think Cliff and so I wanted to understand what was like how did I go in PR and score how did I go in PR my first heptathlon after being with him? And I didn't feel like I did anything. Like I don't really feel like I did anything that first year. And I ended up going out, making the team. I made the Olympic team, so on and so forth, PR. And I didn't feel like I did anything. And so from there, Cliff and I used to have a lot of, and he probably has, Cliff loves to talk. First of all, this man can talk track for like 4 hours straight.
Ever. Yeah. Hmm.
If you want to talk track, call Cliff Rovelto because I can talk track forever. And so whenever we'd be driving to the airport or we'd be on trips or whatever, or we'd be wherever, I was always asking him questions. And so
Yeah.
I wanted to understand what it is, like what's happening. Like I read Tudor Bompa while I was with Cliff because I was trying to understand
Right.
what's, for me in training, but also like have some understanding of what it is. And I was interested. I'll say I was interested in it.
Hmm.
And so I learned a lot from Cliff. It got to the point where, that first year I'm bumbling around, kind of like going to practice and being bored out of my life every single day, Mike. I would go home and I would pray. I was a praying woman during this time in Manhattan, Kansas. I don't think I ever prayed so much and fasted so much in my life except the time I was in Kansas. Because I would literally driving around in my car asking God, why am I here? Like I would be like, how
I
did I
hate to
get
say that a lot of people in Manhattan, Kansas ask that, but maybe.
like I didn't understand how I got to Manhattan, Kansas. Like, what am I doing here? Get up every day, go to practice. My life was peaceful because my life was chaotic. Like my life was in LA, LA to Manhattan was two different worlds.
Oh my.
Lost a lot of friends, changed a lot of things about myself. I was like, what am I doing in Manhattan, Kansas? Ended up buying a house there. I ended up buying a home before I left there.
Hmm.
Um, and so with Cliff, it was like I was coaching and learning, and I'm like, I'm not working hard enough, but I was working hard. And so at some point, I was like, you know what? I just began to like I'd ask so many questions, he would do coach's education, he'd be teaching. I'd like go and be his assistant.
Mm.
So I'm going to go with Cliff. He's going to this place to, he's going here to teach level two. Well, I'm going to go to level two with Cliff too,
Hmm.
as his assistant and sit in on the classes and stuff. And then eventually he let me teach one segment. He let me do one segment, I think, on nutrition um, for him. Part of his section, I did a little section on nutrition. And then, I got to, I failed Boo's biomechanics class. I think the first time I went, my first level one, I failed biomechanics with Boo. and just, just kept sitting. I would literally sit with Cliff, with his coaching friends, and they're talking, and I would just not say anything. I should be sitting there and have nothing to say, just kind of like, I'm just hanging out. I remember those times, just kind of like, and then Cliff would drop things and I'd go read. And then the thing about Cliff is like, what I learned from him so much is training theory.
Mm-hmm.
What I learned from Cliff is training theory. And that was from the conversations we had. And then when I became a coach, things began to make sense.
Mm.
Like when I became a coach, I'm like, oh, that's why we did that, or that's why he did that. So I became a coach. I then began to study everything that I could. And so my first year coaching without Cliff, because I was his assistant I was a volunteer assistant for a year or
Right.
two. Like I actually, I was on staff with him for a couple of years there. When I became my first college coaching job without Cliff, without being an assistant, because mind you, nowadays it's different. I was a volunteer when
Yeah.
I first, then I was an assistant's assistant. I was Cliff's assistant.
All right.
I ain't getting, I was nobody doing work
Right.
because I wanted to learn. That doesn't happen anymore. When I got my first coaching job on my own at Georgetown University, I called Cliff every single weekend. Every week I wrote workouts. I called Cliff. Okay, this is a week, the last week, and I watched a ton of videos and I read everything he told me to read.
Smart
If he
move.
if he mentioned something, oh, this is strength training for women. You got to make sure you keep the strength of women longer in the season than they do for men because they lose strength faster. Oh,
Yeah.
really? Why? I don't know. I went to study that. I went to figure out, okay, this is why. Oh, now
Yeah.
I understand why.
Yeah.
Oh, this is why we don't do this. And so I began to like just become like a Cliff, like everything that he said before, I'd be asking him all kinds of questions about it. Or we'd have these long conversations about training, like long conversations about training. Literally, he probably doesn't know this, but I'm sure I got on his nerves. I took notes when I was talking to Cliff. I'm sure I got on his nerves because I called him it seemed like to me at the time, every week
Yeah.
that I was writing training at Georgetown my first year.
Hmm. Y- You're how does the transition to actually like we're a lot of times our transition to coaching that we've learned here on the podcast is it's not like a light switch. Sometimes we think it's like, oh, it's on or off. It's like, oh, all of a sudden on June 1st, I decided I'm going to become a track coach. It's actually more of like a fader bar. You're getting a great education about how to coach with one of the greatest coaches of coaches, Cliff Rovelto, but you still have an amazing degree from UCLA. You're a curious person, so there's still a lot of avenues as far as careers you could have gone through. You have a lot of experience with travel and competing at a high level, things like that. How did the actual transition of like, because you mentioned, okay, my first job, full-time job is at Georgetown. How did we go all the way to there?
Well, I will say this. Say it this way. I think I've always been coaching. The only years I didn't coach were Olympic years
Right, right, right.
at some level.
Yep. Hmm.
Why? Because I coached high school. I volunteered coaching high school. I volunteered coached age group track. I've coached junior college. When I was with Cliff, if he had me, I coached whatever he told me to coach when he wanted me to help him out here or there. When I left Kansas and came back to San Diego, I made the 2004 Olympic team from here in San Diego at the Olympic Training Center. I began to
Wow.
travel back and forth.
How
At a
many
certain,
Olympic teams did you make?
I made two.
Dude, that's amazing. I always have to give props. Making one Olympic team is, you're in a fraternity of like nobody. Two of them. Come on,
Yeah.
man. That's amazing. Bravo to you. That's I just have to give a props because that's amazing to me.
Entire life. Things are different now. Like it's different now than it was then. So it was like everything had to be done to make an Olympic team back then.
Sure. Yeah.
Like I was poor and then not poor and then, you know. Um, so that transition, so when I left Kansas, I came back to San Diego I made the 2014 from San Diego, but I was traveling back and forth. Cliff was still writing my workouts. I began to sort of coach myself.
Hmm. Hmm.
Cliff was writing workouts. I was here and say, truth story, I couldn't take it anymore being in Kansas.
Sure.
I didn't understand the weather.
Yeah.
I never understood. Freezing rain was like, what is this? And sleet.
Yeah. I always
And it
say,
was
well, it's the ice in Kansas that got me, not the snow and
at a certain
ice.
point, I was like, I don't have to be here anymore. And I had bought a duplex there.
Wow. Yeah.
And so
Dude.
Gwen Wentland, who's another
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Gwen Wentland managed the property when I left, and then
Yes.
eventually sold it.
She's awesome. I
But
love her.
so Gwen's in Arizona now. She and I are still
Yeah.
friends.
Yeah.
Uh, And so it's like I love Kansas. I came back to San Diego, and I would go back and forth, travel back and forth between here and Kansas. And the transition for me was like when I came to San Diego, and I was my spare time I coached. So while I was an athlete, remember, while I was an athlete, I was doing coach's education while I was still competing.
Right.
I didn't wait till I finished competing to start doing coach's education.
Right.
So I got level one, level two. I ended up getting level three, the IAAF, whatever. I did level one, level two, um, with Cliff.
Mm-hmm.
And when I stopped competing, then I went to the throws. I went to the throws clinics at Georgetown. At Georgetown, like I was the sprints, hurdles, jumps, multis, and throws coach for men and women.
Oh man.
For men and women, my first job.
Wow.
So I had to coach everybody, men and women, on the track because Georgetown was a predominantly distance program.
Right. What was that like? It's one thing, like this always fascinates me when it's not always, it's a lot of times it's our more of elite athletes. You do get into some kind of coaching, right? Because there's a lot of people that pull on you in regards to like, oh, you're awesome. You had the Olympic team. Hey, will you come help my kids and things like that. But the first full-time job, specifically college, it's different. You're still coaching, certainly, but there are other things. You're learning a little bit of like, wait a minute, because you went to UCLA and then Kansas State, with Cliff, and down in San Diego and some places. But Georgetown being a predominantly distance, and then we're going to give you a little support for sprints, jumps, hurdles, throws, multis. There was a little bit maybe of a wake up call of like, oh, wait a minute, at UCLA we had everything. What are you talking about? Kansas State that everything. What are you talking about? There's a little bit of like reality, if you will, of
I loved it.
collegiate coaching. Really?
Georgetown was to this day, as much I love saying Georgetown was my favorite job.
How so? That's awesome.
I loved Georgetown. Now I'll put it this way. I loved coaching at Georgetown. I'm not an East Coast girl. Don't like DC.
Yeah, it's a little,
I'm a
yeah,
West Coast girl.
Mm-hmm.
But Georgetown was my funnest job because I got to just make stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
Like I got to try, like I learned so much in my time at Georgetown, and I got to try everything I learned.
Mm.
We didn't have a track at Georgetown. They still don't
Right.
have a track.
Right.
We had a 320-meter track. I had 400-meter hurdle workouts there where I made up how we got around the track and run, come back, run, come back, run, come back.
Yeah.
I mean, I made up all kinds of stuff. I had the weight room wasn't even a weight room. It was this area in the indoor facility with a tarp. And so we're doing, I learned all the Tony. I can't tell you how many times I watched Tony Wells videos on training
Mm.
while at Georgetown. So I watched, spent my money on Lyle Knutson.
Yeah. Yep.
To this, if I were to show you right now,
The tapes that had like the 100-meter hurdles, it would
the
have
blue,
front, back,
I
right
have
side. Yeah.
probably a
Oh yeah.
stack
Yeah.
to this day. Like I can tell my coaching library to this day of how many of those C DVDs I was emailing Lyle, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Of those DVDs that I would just spend all my free time watching
Yeah.
while I was at Georgetown. And like you mentioned Brent McFarland, and
Mm-hmm.
there's the East Coast hurdle coach back then that had written a book, that the Hurdler Bible or something like that, because hurdles became my favorite event. All while I was at Georgetown.
Yeah. That was Wilbert Ross.
Wilbur Ross,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, the Bible of hurdling, and then Britt
Wilbur Ross.
McFarland wrote the one of the hardest books in the world to find today, by the way, the
You
Spiral
can't find it.
Bound. Yeah,
Can't find it.
I wish I knew what I did with mine. I love that book. Yeah, yeah,
Can't find it.
love that man.
At Georgetown, I went back and read, like I was like, this is how not crazy. This is how I told you. I'm still a little bit. It's like I watched all that Tony Wells stuff, right? I was like, I saw his junior clinic, and then I ordered the videos, and I'm understanding, you know, um, velocity, intermuscular training, and shorter than, longer than, da 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 da. Then I'm
Mhm.
like, then I started reading all these articles on Italian sprinting, and going back, and I was like, oh, he got this from here. So I started making all these connections, like this ain't new, like it's new to
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
Figured
yeah.
out like, okay, he's doing this, but you know what? This person in this country did it before he did it, and this is why. So I spent all that time at Georgetown
Hmm.
Literally, Mike. Like I may not talk a lot about, oh, I spent all the time at Georgetown learning how to be a good coach.
Hmm.
Like all the Tony Wells stuff, and I may not execute it in the way that I execute it in a way that makes sense to me because I believe
Hmm.
there's certain things that, in my style.
Hmm.
But I was like, oh, I went and figured out where he got it from.
Hmm.
And then it started, then you start just reading my coaching library from back in those days at Georgetown. It's like I have two computers, and both computers are full of like it says coach's education. I have to transfer from computer to computer to keep up with it. Do I remember all of it? No, but if I wanted, it's there. But my
Hmm.
coaching library grew so much during those times at Georgetown, so much so like my second year at Georgetown, I became I didn't even know what it was. My first second year at Georgetown, I got nominated, got voted the men's Mid-Atlantic Regional Coach of the Year.
Oh, wow.
So as the men's Mid-Atlantic Coach of the Year, I remember going to regionals that year and I had to call Cliff. I was like, Cliff, what is this award? I was like, I got this award, but I don't know what it is. And so he explained
I
to me,
mean, that's impressessive because, again, Georgetown was a distance program that
we
happened to
were,
I say that too. They had, I remember, like, I can't remember the name, but there was a really good quarter miler, I think, from there one year.
they had a lot of good athletes.
Yeah, they've had
They,
some other athletes, but it was
all distance. It was all
800
distance, but
meters and
it's
up,
800
right?
meters up. Yeah.
Yeah, 800 and up. The Reebok Enclave came out of that. And you think about
So
the coaches that were there. Yeah. Hmm.
true story. At Georgetown that first year, now Georgetown's a very elite, academically elite school,
Absolutely. Yeah.
which which I appreciated. I actually liked that. I did like that environment.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, and and so Georgetown being an elite school, I went my first year there coaching, and excuse me, I recruited every smart black kid I could find in the country.
Hmm.
And I shouldn't say black kid, every smart, fast kid I could find in
Hmm.
the country,
Hmm. Hmm.
because it wasn't just black kids.
Yeah.
But as a result of that, I brought in a lot more black kids than they were used to having there.
Right. Sure.
As a result,
Yeah.
Sarah, if she ever hears this, had this one sprinter, one white girl sprinter who probably ran 25, 26 seconds before I got there. Ended up PRing, running fast, but all that. But I spent my first year there, I was sick. I recruited everywhere because Henry didn't give me no money, first of all. I'm not getting any money.
Yeah.
And I still want to be good.
Right.
So if you go get these private school smart kids, Georgetown's great endowments at the time.
Right.
They can go to Georgetown for $500 a year, or $1,000 or $1,500 a year because of
Yeah.
their endowments. And they've got good high, yeah, just like high SAT scores, good students. And so I went out and recruited some really good athletes. And in my second year there, and hurdles became one of my favorite events to coach. My second year there, I qualified like 4 kids to nationals in the hurdles.
Wow. That was unheard of back then. It's unheard of now. And I'm not throwing shade at Georgetown, but
I'm sure that Henner didn't like it very much, but we went to conference, I think the next year. The distance team always outscored the sprint squad. Always, 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 always. The sprinter scored more points than the distance squad. And I was like, and I didn't feel like we got much, we didn't get anything, we had
wow.
to earn it. We didn't get any love.
Right, right,
And
right.
so I just kind of like, and part of my coaching philosophy that I have now as a head coach was born out of my experience at Georgetown
How so?
because my concept of team was born out of my my experience at Georgetown of not being a team
Mm,
because the Georgetown culture was very much set. It's like this is the distance program,
right.
this is the rest of the program, and the rest of the program was left up to me
Mm,
the time I was there. Like I still had a head coach. I had to,
right.
and my philosophy very much differed from Henner's philosophy.
Hmm.
Henner believed sprinters should run 800s, or he believed sprinters should run. Like my first year there, I had girls running 32 seconds in flats, and they're like, "This is so fast! Oh my God!" Like this is not fast. Um, and so our philosophies on speed were very different, and so I had to really defend what I believed, or my coaching philosophy came while I was at Georgetown, which is another reason why I really appreciate Henner.
Oh, yeah.
I appreciate Henner because I really had to defend my approach to what I was doing because I was testing all 20 well stuff at Georgetown. My
Right.
kids would come out, drill, and they run one times 450 and go home for the quarter miles, go home. And he'd be like, they're not running enough.
Nope. Yeah. Funny that you went to that way when you first came to Rovelto and you were like, we're not doing enough.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see this transition of Sheila as
Yeah.
far as philosophy of coaching
Yeah.
there.
And I got, that's why Georgetown was my funnest place to coach, because
Yeah.
I had all of Cliff's, like, especially strength conditioning. Like, I probably learned a lot about strength conditioning from Cliff.
Right.
All the whole training philosophy and understanding, biomotor abilities and all the stuff that he talked about and so on and so forth. I had that. Then I got to try. Oh, does this work?
Mm,
Okay, it does work. Okay, I can come and I can sort of like get the results I wanted
mhm,
based on how I processed and understood, based on what I wanted to get out of it
mm.
with the athletes I had. Because mind you, I don't have top tier athletes.
Right, right.
So I still got to take those developmental lower level athletes and get them better. And I was getting good at it doing what I was doing.
Huh.
And not just in like sprints, yes, but I had everybody, the entire team.
So, the interest of time, do we go from Georgetown to San Diego State?
Easy. That one's easy. I was at Georgetown. I just got nominated Regional Coach of the Year. I was in the middle of getting ready to move. Dixon Farmer. I guess Ron Sheffield was the coach here at San Diego State at the time.
Hmm.
I called Ron while I was at San Diego State at the time. I called Vince Anderson while I was at Georgetown. I was that coach, that young coach back in the day that was just called everybody and said, "Hey, can you tell me?" That
Yeah.
was me as a female coach, right? Like, I just needed to understand what people were doing. I didn't have to call you all the time. I don't need to call you every time.
Right.
Just give me a little understanding. I'll go figure it out. But so I got to San Diego State because Ron had they were looking for someone to replace Ron Sheffield here at San Diego State, and I guess there was the search committee. Dixon Farm happened to be on the search committee, and remembered that, hey, Sheila Burrell was here at San Diego. She knows the area. Da da da. She's now coaching there, and they called me to ask me if I'd be interested in applying. And I'll tell you, I said no. I was like, apply. I had just recruited this guy named Justin Crawford, who's number 5 hurdler in the country. I had this kind of Chris Kinney coming in. I had this kid from San Diego coming in, who's a good sprinter. I had this other guy. I had like a great recruiting class for Georgetown, right? I'm like, I'm about to tear this conference up and go to nationals, right? This was my thought process. It's like, of course I'm not leaving. So I told him I had to think about it. I called Coach Rovelto and I called Cliff and I was like, well, this happened. And so then Cliff gave me some perspective. He said,
He's
listen,
good at that.
he gave me some perspective. I was 30, uh, 30, so I think I may be 36, maybe at the time. Was
Hmm.
that 30? I think I was 36. I can tell people I'm 36, but I may have been 30. No, I was 36. Okay. I was 36 years old at the time. And Cliff said to me, well, listen, Cliff, you get an opportunity to be a head coach, right? Um, you you have the opportunity. I was like, but I don't have experience. And I have this kid. I have these kids. And this is what he said. He said, Sheila, you will always have kids.
Hmm.
Like, you're always going to have an athlete. You're always going to have somebody. But if you have an opportunity to be a head coach, you should take that opportunity to be a head
Hmm.
coach now. And then you can, move from there. So my thought process, I was like, okay, I'll apply. So I applied with the sense of like, if I don't get it, I don't care. Because I got a good recruiting class coming in. I'm
Right.
so excited to work with. I had some really good male hurdlers coming in. I had a couple freshmen. I was like, oh, my guys, hurdles are going to be good. I didn't care if I got the job. And lo and behold, middle of moving, my house is all packed up. San Diego State calls. I go come out for the interview. I'm like, hey, can you tell me if I get the job or not? Because I'm in the middle of moving and signing a lease to another apartment. Like, I'm ready to move. Um, and then finally they called and said I got the job. I was like, okay, great. So I'm coming back to San Diego. My thought process as a coach, I thought that it would go like this. I thought I'd be in Georgetown for a few years coaching. Then I'd have to go someplace south and get a coaching job before I can come back to the West Coast. Because my goal was always to come back to California.
Right.
And that was the other thing. It was like, okay, I can come back to California now, or I can wait and go through that whole process of like, I've got to coach here and pay my dues here, then go
Right.
there, pay my dues there, because I had a thing to prove. For the interest of time, one thing I had to prove when I went to Georgetown, this is what I had to prove at Georgetown to me and to like, I always had to prove something, is that I'm a former athlete. And I didn't want anybody to think that I got the job, that I'm because I'm a former athlete, that I got the job, or
Right.
I didn't want people that can't coach. So
Hmm.
my thing was I had to prove that I can coach. I had to prove that I can coach by being a good coach because I'm a former athlete. I'm an Olympian. Me being an Olympian, did it help me get the position? Absolutely, yes. But then once I got the position in my mind, I had to prove that I deserved the position.
Right.
Two, I'm a Black female. So at that time when I was getting hired, it was this whole thing. There was the diversity hire was going on throughout all NCAA athletics at the time. Like, okay, I fit the quota. I'm Black and I'm female. They filled that position. Did I want a position because I was a Black and female? No, but I'd take it because I was. Absolutely. And I had to prove that I was a good enough coach, even though I was a Black and a female. Because I
Hmm.
didn't want to get a job. I'm one of those people I didn't want the job because of these things. I wanted to actually deserve the job.
Hmm.
So I had to prove at Georgetown, one of my things, I had the other chip on my shoulder was
Yeah.
prove to you that I'm a pretty good, that I'm a good coach.
Hmm.
And so my time at Georgetown was the funnest job I had because I proved that I was a good coach. I had nothing. I had zero. I begged for money, got these kids in school, did the whole waivers, did the whole like go sit before the committee to get kids in school, messed up a few times, you know, got in trouble because I didn't go to the office. Hannah didn't like that I didn't go to the office all day because I was on the track all day. I dealt with the elitism, um, and all that, but it was my funnest job because I just learned so much.
Do you, your experiences are real. So this question might sound like I'm poo-pooing those, putting those to the side. But I'm hearing when you talked about Bobby Kersee, there was that chip on my shoulder, and then I had to prove that just because I'm an athlete and a good athlete or a great athlete, I deserve this job, and I'm going to show you because I'm going to do the job really well. I'm Black. I'm going to show you that that's not a hindrance. I'm a woman. I'm going to show you that's not a hindrance. All these chips on you. Are you the type of person that needs a chip on their shoulder?
I like it.
Hmm. Where does that
I'm not
come?
going to say I don't. I don't. I'm going to say this. I like it because, like, here's my thing right now. I don't consider myself a sprint coach. I enjoy coaching sprints. I think I'm a decent coach, but I love beating people who are sprint coaches,
Mm,
like who are sprint coaches.
hmm.
Like I like
Hmm.
having athletes that are maybe not, because I'm at San Diego State, but I'm at the show. But I'm not a quote unquote sprint coach, even though I am a sprint coach. I'm a coach.
Right.
I love beating coaches who are quote unquote sprint coaches, um, because I'm supposed to be a multis coach.
Right. Yeah. All right. All right. Yeah.
You know, I love coaching hurdles, and I like beating hurdle coaches because I'm supposed to be a multis coach.
Do you think, and we're going to get into San Diego State here in a second, but so we're kind of encompassing the whole career up to this point. Do it feels like you need an adversary. That's another way of saying chip on the shoulder. An adversary is not necessarily a person. It could be the image of a person. You described it there of like, oh, I like being sprint coaches. That's an
Hmm.
adversary. Do you think, Sheila, you're an amazing coach. It doesn't matter the event. You're an amazing person. You could lead whatever you want to call big universities, Oregon, Texas, Florida, Georgia. I mean, but do you think you could succeed there? And what I mean by that is there's less excuses at some of those places, right? And we can get into the debate of resources, and you know it better than I do. Or would you have to always figure out an adversary? That's not a
Yeah,
bad thing.
that's a good question, and I think that there are adversaries at that level as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Um, and I think that even where I'm at right now, I don't uh, I don't want to, like, I try to compete as if those are the people I'm competing against,
Hmm.
or the
Hmm.
schools that I'm competing
Hmm.
against.
Hmm.
But I will say this, that what I enjoy, not enjoy, but what the joy of being in the position that I'm in now, even in all of my I guess now that you made that connection, made that parallel, um, in my career, is that if I go back to my childhood, yes, I had to overcome some things to, I had to overcome some things in order um, to have some sense of security. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And in getting that security, holding on to that security.
Mm-hmm.
Professionally, um, not having always thought that I always had to kind of work a little bit, being at a disadvantage from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
You know, coming from a disadvantaged position has been pretty common it's a common theme, I guess I could say,
Mm-hmm.
in my upbringing. And even now in my career, now that you brought that up, it's like, I don't mind that. It like,
Mm-hmm.
let's, let's do it. Okay. I'm
Yeah.
comfortable in that position.
Yeah.
Now, you said something interesting is that if you were at a school with more resources, do you think you'd need an adversary? I think I would be fine. I would be okay at a school with more resources. I think where I would struggle is I wouldn't enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't enjoy it as much. And I've thought about this. I thought because sometimes every school. Sometimes you like I got to get out of nobody's no situation, no school, no university is like utopia.
Yeah. Zero,
And
by the way, zero schools. That's exactly right.
and I'm in a mid-major, so there's lots of struggles and limitations that are happening here, and mindsets that are different from mine. However, I have a greater impact, I think, on student athletes in the position I am now
Yeah.
because of who I am than I would at one of those schools.
Yeah.
Because I tell the people I recruit is that this thing is a business, right? Track and field is a business. You got to score points. My job is to score points and to win championships. And so I think that at San Diego State, I've got to do business, but the difference is I can do good business.
Mm. Interesting.
Is that I want to be able to do good business, and I want to do good business in this way. I want my athletes to graduate, go on in life, and come back and invite me to their weddings, or let me know when they have kids, or I want to have this relationship. So the relationship piece, where the athletes end up, feeling I did right, like me or not, and in the big picture, I want to have this is the part of me being an old school track and field head, and what track and field meant to me. My development in the sport as an athlete and coach is that somebody always helped me. And so me being able to give back, I think with my personality and who I am, I'm able to do that more in this environment with these athletes than I would at a school where it's just business.
Yeah.
Because I get to teach, Mike, I get to teach. And if you got to come into, I'm just gonna throw it, I don't care. You got to come into Florida and know how to do some things.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't do some things, you might get chopped, you ain't making it, you're put on the shelf. Like you gotta come in like doing these things. I actually like teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's my chip on my shoulders. I bring these kids who don't come in having that skill, and I get them to be able to do that, and they're beating those kids that
Right.
who didn't get taught anything, who just come out and do.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that was me.
Do
I
you,
believe that I was a developmental kid out of high school that went to a school that, had Olympians on it.
yeah.
And I needed some time to develop.
Yeah. I think that's a common thing amongst multis. You have tathletes and decathletes. Rarely, if ever, are you coming out of high school as the next Olympian. It's like, oh, you got to learn so much before you can get there. So it's kind of that, I've heard combined inventors called gym rats. You've got to
Uh,
just be in there all the
yeah, I
time.
think multis make great coaches.
I
I think
100%.
multis. What's the coach from that was at Tennessee?
Bill Webb.
Webb.
Yeah. He put out a
I
few
think
multis.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Webb had said this to one of my assistants at one point where like he came to work for me and he was like, well, Webb said that, working for a head coach as a multi is probably the best, the best coach because like, dude, I can coach. I'm a coach. I can coach everything. I'm gonna let you coach what you can coach. I'm gonna let you be good at it. I'm okay, but I can do it too.
Right.
Hang on one second. My contractor is at the door.
Yeah. Please
He's
do. Please do.
lock
Yeah.
himself out.
Absolutely. It's true what she's
Or
talking about with multis. It's really phenomenal. And I think what she's talking about there about, an assistant can coach their event, but you don't always necessarily have the support at your school. You have support from your peers, but to have your head coach actually be able to support you because he or she, in this case, knows how to do it. I think that is important.
at San Diego State, Mike, I started off coaching the jumps and the multis my first year, a couple years here. Jumps, multis, and I had to coach the cross country team because I fired my cross country coach after the first semester, 3 years in a row.
Did you
I
say three
coached,
years in a row?
yeah, the first guy I didn't like him, the second guy I didn't like him. So I thought I could do better, and for a couple of years I could, but it just takes too much time. I was at Georgetown, so I call all my
Oh
Georgetown
yeah, sure. You
at
got the
UConn.
connections, right?
So I read the Jack Daniels book. Where's that Jack Daniels? Daniels running formula. It's on my shelf right there. I coached from Jack Daniels running formula for the first year. No joke. That's how I coached, and I called my boys back at UConn to help me.
That's
So
awesome.
that's how I coached the cross country distance team my first couple of years. Uh, but what was my point? What would you just ask me? Oh,
We were,
no. I coached the jumps and multis.
yep.
Had a young sprint coach, did his thing. He
Mhm.
moved on. When he moved on, I was like, maybe I should coach the sprinters. I can't coach the sprinters, so on. Hired another sprint coach. Let her coach sprints and hurdles. I coached everyone else, and they eventually she moved on, and I became the sprint coach. Now I'm the sprint coach, sprints
Mhm.
and multis. And then last year, I coached sprints, multis, jumps coach. I coached everybody in the track last year because my jumps coach moved on.
I love how you made a distinction there that has some fuzzy lines, meaning that not everything is black and white. But you talked about doing good business. You're you're an athlete's coach, meaning I've seen kids go into your program. And let's not kid ourselves here. You talked about like, I'm a mid-major. You get some really talented kids here at SDSU, but they all have to be to get to where you're trying to get them to nationals. They got to get better. I mean, they're just
Everybody gets
I don't know
better.
that anybody comes in right off the bat and they're a national qualifier for you. They've got to get better. Do you think I want to touch on a little bit what's going on with NCAA now? We're going to these caps of 45 for the roster, and I don't know. You may carry 30 people in your team, so maybe it doesn't affect you at all. But do you feel like that's going to hinder coaches like yourself of like how many kids I can actually give a shot to, if you will?
No, it actually the only I'm under. We are already under that.
Yeah, 40 45 is a lot. I know
It's
it came
we
it
used
came as a shock
Most
to the
schools carry
system.
60.
Yeah, it came as a shock to the system, but 45 is a good amount of kids.
Most people carry 60. Why?
Is
Because
that
you have
right?
the distance side of things. Yeah,
Oh, sure, sure, sure,
most people
sure.
want to have distance.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Um, but no, so what it changed, what that changed, we instituted that a couple of years ago. What it
Mm,
changed for me is I have less room to develop with a smaller roster.
hmm.
And so I can't take that walk-on kid anymore that I know is going to take me 2 years. I can't take those 2-year projects anymore.
Right.
Um, I used to be able to do that, but I can't take a 2-year project
Yeah.
where it's a conference level project, right?
Hmm.
Uh, so now we've got to, we're just recruiting, like my recruiting standards or my roster spots to get a roster spot, the standard had to go up
Yeah.
because, we don't have I have 20 outside of distance. I only have 20 something,
Right.
26 athletes to cover all the track. And I don't have time or resources to sit a kid for 2 years, say, hey, you're my 2-year project.
So with that, I'm really concerned about the events that have to be developed the most. So I think about the hammer and the javelin, right? Because we don't have as many high schoolers coming with it. But
Yeah, we had to make choices.
one of the events that I think is really, outside looking in, that I'm really concerned about is the multis. I mean, that's typically, again, a kid that has to get to their junior year before they can actually start doing things because they got to learn
Not
so many
anymore.
things.
Have you seen the results for the multis over the years? I used to think that like, when Reeser got second at nationals and,
Hmm.
I had like 5 multis on my team. I thought I was in that sweet spot, like nobody was paying attention to the multis.
Hmm.
Like, oh, yeah, that's probably why people think I'm a good multi coach because there was a sweet spot at a certain time where no one
Hmm.
was putting a lot of money or effort into the multis. Then suddenly they caught on and the marks in the multis have gone up significantly.
Crazy.
Decathlon and heptathlon have gone up where
Hmm.
people are now investing in the multis because that's 10 points there, but that athlete can score their points as well. And it's my favorite event to coach. It's my favorite group of people to work
Sure,
with.
sure.
Um, love my sprinters, my multis are my favorite group of people. Um, but it's it's now where the multis, I don't think the multis are in trouble. I
Hmm.
really don't. my opinion of what I think is going to happen is that schools are gonna not going to be able to be complete teams anymore.
Uh, okay, good. I initially thought, oh, this will help build better teams. I'm now on this track. I think it's actually going to make it worse as far as the single focus, if you will.
Yeah, I don't think that we're going to
Hmm.
be like we with the roster limits that we have right now. It's I used to be a complete team. I used to believe I'm Cliff Rovelto, like
Hmm. Yeah.
listen, like I'm going to have throwers,
Yep.
jumpers, pole vaulters, da, da, da. But with what's happening with roster caps and uh NIL and kind of the things are it's going to be I can't be a complete team anymore.
Hmm.
Like I can't put money in every single event, or even put bodies in every single event because I'm limited on the number of bodies I have on the team,
Right.
and I have to figure out where can our team be successful in what event areas to the strengths of my coaching staff.
Right.
So I was recruited to the strength of my coaching staff, and so I can't. I have to, what's the strength of my coaching staff, and that's where I'm going to put like if my throws are not very strong right now. It doesn't make sense for me to put money in throws.
Right.
I had a volunteer assistant for distance for a while, so it didn't make sense for me to put money in distance.
Right.
Now I have a full-time coach, and now I'm putting money in distance. So it's those types of things.
Yeah. So let's spend the little time we have left here. How long have you been at San Diego State now? What would we say, 16
16.
years? So relatively, we talk about training age with athletes, relatively young coaching age for you to become a head coach of a big city
Yeah.
program here. This ain't, I'll throw my school under the bus. This ain't Troy University. I love you guys. I love you. You're in San Diego, California. There's a lot of athletes when you're in California, things like that. I love this, one of my top three questions. This is my number three question. When you first become a head coach, were you ready?
Listen, making an Olympic team is harder than this job.
Really? I'm
When
not
I first
poo-pooing an
got
Olympic team. There's more head coaches
Look,
out there than
when
there are
I
Olympians, but
first got this job and I thought, okay, you're a head coach. I thought making an Olympic team was way harder than this job
huh,
from this perspective. Listen, before I even became a head coach, gonna be a coach, I did all the USOC leadership, women in leadership conferences. Like I did all that stuff as an athlete, Mike,
right.
or as a, very beginning. So I did all of let me learn how to, let me be prepared. That's my
Yeah,
personality,
yeah,
right?
yeah, right. Yeah,
Let me learn what I need to learn so I can make sure I'm going to do a good job. And I remember being in one class and, or one of these sessions and someone was like, well, I was like, I would never take a job I'm not prepared for. I feel like it sets me up to fail. Like, why would I accept a job because I'm a black female? This was at the time when this diversity thing was going on as a black female. When I know that I'm not prepared to the job, I feel like I'm being set up for failure because there were so many of us at the time in my vision that I saw were getting these jobs and then not doing a great job. And so you look at women in coaching, like, why aren't the women in coaching doing like there's how many women coaching? Da, 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 da. And I was like, because you're giving us jobs that we're not like we should be able to do, but you're not equipping us
hmm,
well enough to be able to do the job. That's how I saw it, right?
right.
I didn't want to be one of those women. So I made sure I was prepared. And this is me.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when I got the job, it's like, okay, paperwork, I can do paperwork. I can learn. And so getting the job was like, I'm gonna make mistakes along the way. I got my first violation my first year recruiting some Nigerian kid, right? So, it's like I'm learning the rules and recruiting this from Nigeria and figuring out what to do with her and how to oh, I messed up, my bad. So you go through all of that stuff, but like and then athletes, your first year taking over somebody's team, they all hate you. They all think that, they all want their old head coach, but we're unhappy with their old head coach or situation. And, so I lined them all up and let me tell you who I am. And this whole speech, well, let me tell you who I am and what I've done so that you can got rid of everybody, start all over again. I had no problem with that stuff because making an Olympic team back then, when you had to do it with zero help or resources until you got
Mm,
resources, like I had to figure that out.
mm,
I had to figure it out being an athlete. And then being an athlete who was basically in charge of me.
right, right.
And then the amount of emotional, spiritual, mental, and intellectual effort that went into making those two Olympic teams for me, and the ups and downs, the adversity and the successes, and da, da, da. This job was like, if you know how to, like, I understand how to win. So like, let's just go from there. I
Yeah.
wasn't overwhelmed by the like, oh my God, I gotta now they had Now, being a head coach is more than coaching. Like, no one likes the paperwork side of it, but I happen to be pretty decent at it.
Hmm.
So it wasn't, I was an English major. I could write.
You're used to paper. So a lot of the aspects of a head coach, um, they're not hard. There's some that, maybe you don't want to do, like you said, the paperwork and
Politics
stuff
are
like
hard.
that.
Adults
Yeah,
are hard. Politics
sure.
are hard.
And there's nothing that's going to prepare you for that, right? There's no, Cliff doesn't sit you down one day and say, "Hey, here's what politics looks like when you're a head coach." There's no class. You just kind of have to learn that. Budgeting, that may be something you got to learn. Like, but you have your own, you've had a personal budget for your whole life, so you can understand those things. But one of the things that I see that isn't discussed very often, and I see a lot of people make these kind of mistakes, is now that you're the head coach, you hire and fire people. And there's no class. No one sits you down. I don't think Cliff or Hen or anybody sat you down and said, "Hey, here's how I hire and your why," and things like that. And I just heard, oh my gosh, good news, bad news. I talk to so many people, I sometimes now forget who I'm actually talking to. So I can't remember if this was at a convention a week ago or if this was an interview I just did. But they said hiring your friends is easy, firing your friends is hard. And I was like, oh man, that's really that's a poignant thing. How have you developed as someone who has a review process and there's laws and things like that? How have you made mistakes or corrected, or how have you figured that part out as the head coach?
I've been very fortunate. Um, Very fortunate. When I said earlier that my experience at Georgetown helped develop my coaching philosophy as a head coach, it has to do with this.
Mm.
It has to do with this right here. Because I learned that lesson while I was at Georgetown, and I saw it in my own staff at some point,
Mm.
is that one, I had a friendship with somebody who probably thought I should have hired him, and I was not going to hire him. That could put a strain on our friendship. I
Mm-hmm.
knew off the bat that I should not hire this person, even though she was a friend of mine. Um, and was willing to take the risk of, trying to see ahead. But one, in a program like there should only be one head coach.
Mm.
I have a small enough group. When I was at Georgetown, I would tell my team, sorry, Henner, I would tell my group, listen, I'm your coach. Henner's my boss, but I'm your coach.
Right.
And so I ran my little sprint, hurdles, jumps, multi-throws group men and women like I was the head coach.
Mm-hmm.
Organized practices, expectations, standards, rules, all that stuff. I ran my little group like I was head coach. Now, as a head coach, I would never allow that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
As a
Right.
head coach, I would never allow that to happen.
Right.
So when I got the head coaching job here, I knew already
I'm not gonna let
that,
someone do to me what I did to him, or what I did, I should say.
and when I saw that happening,
Yeah.
young coaches are like that. When I saw that happening,
Yeah.
3 years in, this head coach
Mhm.
has to move on. That was the hardest thing I had to do. My first time firing somebody was very hard,
Yeah.
very difficult for me, but it needed to happen. And kind of, I don't like it. And he and I had some, it lasted a while. It was not pretty.
Yeah.
Um, but as a head coach now, I try to hire coaches or find people who are willing to be a part of my team, understand that whether I'm right, wrong, or whatever, there's only one head coach, and that's me. And so and I've been fortunate because I hadn't had to hire and fire a lot of people.
Mhm.
I've had Michelle Freeman, who was my sprint coach, ended up moving on for another job. That was a better opportunity for her. I love her, absolutely love her. Um, and we had some great success when she was here. I hired my two first hires. My two first hires, Mike, were intentional. I wanted to hire young first-time coaches.
Mm.
So I went and hired young first-time NCAA coaches on purpose. And the reason why? Because we're still making phone calls to recruit back then, right?
Right.
Because I said, if I'm going to be in this office late and recruiting and do whatever, I need to grind. I need two young guys that ain't got nothing else going on in their life except this, and I want them to grind too.
Right.
So me and my first sprint assistant, we traveled he had flight benefits, I had flight benefits. We were recruiting our asses off all over the place. Anybody, everybody, didn't matter who,
Yeah.
because he had the time, I had the time, and you ain't got nothing else to do, and I got nothing, so we're to recruit. And
Yeah.
then eventually my staff got more mature and older. But in the beginning, I knew I needed two guys. This is all we're doing.
See, I think that's important. And I remember having a discussion with someone on the podcast too about the makeup of your staff, not just, oh, I need a sprint or a throws or, just the position. And I think that's how most hires are probably done. You call it the 80-20 rule. Maybe 80% of like, hey, I need a throws coach. What's the best throws coach that I can get that'll work with me and things like that. And I think there's a different level, a higher level of strategy of like, oh, in this age and stage of my program and me, I need some people who don't necessarily have a family at this point. You're not hiring because of that, but I need people that are going to be in the office 8, 9, 10 o'clock because this is what we need today at this point. And
Exactly.
we adjust as we move along. So I don't think that part's discussed enough.
And I did so I probably in that day I was probably misguided in my thought process. When I first became head coach, I knew I wasn't going to hire another female coach.
Mm,
Like I purposely didn't hire another female coach.
mm,
Like I knew that in my thought process at the time, um, I don't feel that way now. I wouldn't do it like now it's totally different because I've, grown, matured, and I know
mm-hmm,
more.
mm-hmm,
But at the time I thought that because if anybody's gonna have a bad day, it's gonna be me. Because I knew how I am, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I knew me well enough to know
Right,
that I'm not arguing with you about your feelings, about how you feel. I'm not,
right,
if
right.
I can get these two guys, okay, just leave her alone. Okay, leave me alone.
All right, Sheila, we are past time. Thank you so much for giving me extra time. So I've got one last question, and then I'll
Sure.
give you back
I'll
your
make it
day.
short.
Uh, what have you in 16 years of a head coach here at San Diego, one program? I remember a couple of years back at the convention, a group of us were talking about coaches that had been at a university for any significant amount of time. We got through some of the maybe more top of head, Mouse and Curtis Fry at the time, who's now retired, things like that. But we didn't get really past 10 until we had to really struggle to start thinking about coaches that had been there for 10, 15, 20 years. You've been there for 16 years. I want to know. So there's a group listening right now that are either they're 1 or 2 or 3 years away from becoming a head coach for their first time, or they're in their first 1, 2, 3 year of head coaching. How have you, and maybe a little bit of tactical of like, what have you done possibly? How have you changed from head coach 16 years ago to you're staring at the 2025 season right now? How have you changed to make yourself a better head coach? And any kind of tactical, like, oh, I took this leadership class or I did this or whatever might be helpful as well.
I think that I got the opportunity to spend some time talking to one Cliff, talking to him about um, the coaching professional life. He and I've had plenty of conversations about that. Had conversations with Bev Kearney. Um, you know, Whatever people think, he was a huge influence um, on me, being the one of the
Absolutely.
dominant and predominant female coaches in the country for a while, and then having, had to deal with and manage with some of the politics of being in that position she's in over the years, and had some conversations with her that really stuck with me. And I think that, aside from being able to manage people, I don't think I'm a great coach, first of all. I'm not that great of a coach. I'm a good coach, but I'm not, not that great of a coach. I'm good at coaching people
Mm,
and not necessarily systems. I can adapt, I can change. And that leads me to one thing I think that has helped me over the years because of the mentors and the people that I've been able to discuss, what I'm dealing with, or the advice I've been given over the years, and is that you have to be able to maintain the same, like my philosophy, my core belief about who I am and what I do and why I do it does not change. However, I've had to adapt to the people that I'm working with and managing. I've had
mm,
to adapt to the athletes, and I've had to adapt to who's on my staff as time changed. And I'm the one
mm,
who, if I'm going to lead the group in order to be that leader, has to make that change or that adaptation. Meaning that, you know, my coaching staff now is much more mature, which I like, right? And so I give those guys a little more leeway than
mm,
I would give a younger coach. When I first started coaching, I gave my young coach way too much freedom, way too much leeway. I believe that if you're going to be a good coach, be a good coach. I don't care if you're a better coach than me. But I learned with young coaches, let them be a good coach, but you got to keep them, let them grow. But you got to put some guardrails around them.
mhm,
These days, I also learned that with athletes, it's like this is a totally different time and age that we're, this is a different landscape, different culture that we're in with athletes.
Mhm.
And so you've got to hold on to, look, I hold on to standards and expectations. These are standards, these are expectations. We hold on those. And you should be afraid of me at some point. You should be a little afraid, a little concerned, a little worried. Um, but at the same time, allow people to be who they are. It's very difficult.
Mhm.
It seems like the paperwork is the paperwork, right? Administrative stuff, leadership is being able to connect with, communicate, and really give people a sense of, you know, empowerment with your standards and expectations. So they're always wanting to meet with your standards and they respect you. I think that the one time I lost respect from one of my assistant coaches is when was probably the hardest firing I had to do. Like me, dislike me, the disrespect that you can't handle.
Mhm.
And so it's not like, I went and took some class or whatnot, just because of the way I am and the way I work. I remember Coach Craig Poole said to me one time, people really coach out of their personalities.
Mhm.
How you process information, how you take in information, you really coach
Right.
out of your personality.
Yeah.
And my personality is I think I'm just pretty cool and pretty chill. There's no reason for you to I want to be good. I want to win. I'm be very clear. I'm very upfront. I'm very direct. I'm very transparent about who it is, what I'm doing, and why I want to do it. And if we can do that, we can move together. If we can't, then we got to separate. And I tell you that up front. That's with athletes and assistants. And so I'm very clear about who I am so that I can then build my team around that.
If you're listening, I recommend you hit the rewind button because I set the question up of like if you might be a head coach in the next year or two, or if you're a young head coach right now. As she was explaining that, I'm thinking about that first time assistant coach. You're trying to figure out, how do I operate with my head coach? She kind of gave you the game plan. If you're a 10-year head coach and you're trying to figure out, how do I become a better in the year 15? She kind of gave you the game plan right there. Setting expectations. I'm gonna boil it down to my, slow Alabama brain. Setting expectations up front. I think those have to work together. I don't think you get to do
Oh
one
yeah.
without the other. So, Sheila, thank you so much. The most valuable thing you can ever give me is your time. And we're literally, like I said, you're listening to this probably in February of 2025. We're recording this the day after Christmas, and
Yeah.
Sheila was, and she's in the middle of a project. I mean,
Yeah,
just
we get my bathroom remodel. The contract is coming
yeah,
out.
I'm just so grateful. Thank you so much. Your journey matters. It's important, and I think people hearing what you came up through and what you've done, and adversities and positivities, right? I mean, there is a privilege to be in a UCLA grad versus, again, I'll pick up my university, a Troy grad, et cetera. But at the end of the day, yeah, I think we talked about this in one of our interviews a week or so ago. Who might get you there, might get you the job, but what keeps the job. And
Yeah.
I think, your story of like the mentors you've had from the Bobbies, your English teacher, that might be the most unsung hero in this whole thing. I love that she became friends, not just, teacher. I really do love
Yeah.
that. Please tell her, thank you, because without her influence, we don't have Coach Burrell, I think. So, so I
I'll
love
let her
that.
know
I
that.
love that very much. And really just grateful for you. And thank you so much for sharing your journey with us today.
Mike, appreciate you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for your support as well.
Always. You deserve that. You deserve it. Guys and gals, thank you so much. Season 6 is a banger. We've just had like, I can't remember if this is 6 or 7 in a row here of just amazing, amazing human beings. I'm just so blessed that they would spend time with us and spend time with you. And hopefully you're learning from them, because that's at the end of the day, that's what we got to do when we spend this time together. So thank you so much for being here. Join us next week. We'll do it all over again. Thanks, guys.